Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to today's Friday Reflections on the early hours of Saturday, the 12th of August 2023. I hope you are well wherever you're tuning into this from. And sorry, I'm a little later today than I would initially have liked. Just had plans on Friday, and yes, don't always go according to when we would like to do them, but never mind. Busy week. On Wednesday, I was in Oxford visiting my colleagues and also my friend Sheikh Ramsey, who gave me this wonderful book, The Most High, The Names, Al Azma, Al Husna, Everyone Should Know, by Sheikh Ramsey of Oxford. And he even signed it for me. It's very, very lovely of him. So really appreciate this. Thank you, Sheikh Dr. Ramsey, and I will enjoy reading this. But today I'm actually going to read another book that was sent to me by another scholarly friend of mine, Joel Hayward, who wrote a book, The Leadership of Muhammad. And he sent me this a few months back, and I would like to have a read of the chapters in this book. Now, the Prophet Muhammad was a remarkable person. I mean, as Muslims, we see him obviously as the Prophet of Allah. We see him as the beloved of Allah. We are always exalting the remarkable qualities of the Prophet Muhammad. But perhaps one of the qualities that we do not focus on, but maybe we should, is what Joel discusses in this chapter of his book, The Leadership of Muhammad, the common touch. And this is on page 53 of Joel's book. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Muhammad undoubtedly had the common touch, the ability to relate and appeal to ordinary people from all walks of life. And this was central to his appeal as a leader. People wanted to follow him because of the rapport they felt with him. They knew he was different, of course. He was a prophet and a leader with a scrupulously righteous conduct. But he never adopted an air of superiority and seemed in many ways to be a normal man with ordinary interests who smiled and cried at or liked and disliked many of the same things as everyone else. For example, he reportedly admired wrestling, and even as a man of advanced years, he enjoyed the thrill of what might seem a purely worldly activity. When he was about 50, he happened to come across Rukana ibn Abu Yazid ibn Ibn Hashim ibn Abdul Muttalib ibn Abdul Manaf. So Rukana ibn Abdul Yazid ibn Hasham ibn Abdul Muttalib ibn Abdul Manaf, the Quraysh tribe's strongest man. Now, he could not pass up the opportunity to share Islam with Rukana, asking him why he had not yet accepted the religious invitation. Rukana replied that he might if he could be sure of the truth of Muhammad's message. Muhammad asked Rukana whether he would accept the message if Muhammad could throw him to the ground. Rukana said yes. He challenged Muhammad. First, Rukana said yes, only to find himself thrown to the ground. Then Rukana challenged Muhammad to try it again, which, to his amazement, he was thrown to the ground again. This is like you imagine Hulk Hogan or The Rock or someone of this, of the time of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu. He was the professional wrestler of the day. He won all the wrestling fights. Muhammad threw him to the ground once, and then he couldn't believe it, so he challenged Muhammad to try it again, and which, to the wrestler's amazement, he did. Many Muslims today are less familiar with this story than they are of a hadith, which has become popular, and which reflects Muhammad's ability to use everyday things to communicate moral and spiritual truths. The strong man is not one who wrestles well, but the strong man is one who controls himself when he becomes angry. Muhammad Sallallahu also enjoyed horse and camel racing, and accordingly arranged public races and sometimes rewarded the winners from his own money. Trained horses raced the 6 miles between Al-Hafiyah and Al-Wada, while the untrained horses raced the 1 mile between Thaniyat Al-Wada and the mosque of Banu Zurayq. The Prophet ﷺ later said, "I was among those who raced, and my horse jumped with me over a wall." A hadith richly captures the atmosphere at such races. Allah's Prophet ﷺ had a camel, Adba, which was almost impossible to surpass in a race. Then a Bedouin came riding his camel, which was younger than 6 years, and that camel beat it, i.e. Abda, in the race. The result was hard on the Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ noticed and stated the following to console them: "It is Allah's law that everything that goes up has to come down." The Prophet ﷺ also believed that archery was both an enjoyable and rewarding pastime and should be taught to boys, as he had himself learned it and also practiced it throughout his life. Practice archery and practice riding. That you should practice archery is even more beloved to me than that you should ride. All idle pastimes that the Muslim engages in are pointless, except for his shooting of his bow, his training of his horse, and his playing with his wife, for they are from the truth. He even thought that if one had learned archery and then grown tired of it, he had rejected or become ungrateful for what was, in fact, a blessing. Naturally, mastery of archery brought a tangible benefit. Arrow wounds killed and disabled more people in Arab battles than swords and spears. In preparation for fighting, Muhammad once exhorted, "Prepare to meet them with as much strength as you can muster. Beware, in archery is strength. Beware, in archery is strength. Beware, in archery is strength." He added, "So let none of you forsake practicing with his arrows." Now, interesting things here. The point about the camel and what goes up must come down. So what becomes successful, what becomes, great or a leader or successful business or a successful, in this case, an animal that was racing, like today, a successful racehorse. They have their time when they do well, and then they eventually they don't anymore. And this is an undoubtable truth that the Prophet Muhammad SAW highlighted there to console his companions. What's interesting is the fact that the Prophet Muhammad SAW used to himself enjoy and practice horse racing. I mean, this is, and camel racing. I mean, this is not something that we often hear about when we listen to people talking about the life of the Prophet Muhammad. The other thing emphasized here is that the Prophet Muhammad used to practice archery, as well as emphasizing practicing horse riding. And one of the reasons for this was back in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and I know this also from my own history, in early English history, archery was really important. English archers were also very famous. Longbowmen that we used to have in England that used to, this is where the legend of Robin Hood comes from, who was also someone who apparently used a bow, but he was far from alone. Back in those days, archery was really valuable because, and as it says here, more people were killed and disabled, as Joel says, in Arab battles with arrows than with swords and spears. And the reason is, of course, very obvious. You shoot an arrow. If you hit your target, you down your opponent before they even get close to you. So it really is, on the field of battle, it's a very valuable skill to have. And so this point about horse racing and archery back then had a very practical reason for it, because the security of the community and the security of the families living in that community depended explicitly upon these skills. And if you didn't have these skills, then you were at a profound disadvantage. And this is what Joel discusses in the next chapter. It was because horse and camel racing and archery were highly beneficial skills for warriors, and therefore needed to be mastered during this era when campaigning occurred every year, that Muhammad made it permissible to gamble on these activities, with some restrictions on the knowledge of the outcome's uncertainty and whether participants and non-participants could lay bets or benefit. Games of chance and gambling on everything else had been banned, based on a clear and unarguable Quranic revelation. Yet the skill and training involved in racing and archery, plus the enormous societal benefit of fostering excellence in these necessary martial activities, allowed Muhammad to offer something of an exemption. A hadith states, Allah's Messenger said rages are allowed only for racing camels or horses or shooting arrows. Muhammad intuitively knew that his best hope for building an effective leader-follower relationship with others was to create an egalitarian society in which everyone would benefit from the growing prosperity of his polity, and in which they all saw him among them and had easy access to him. Rapport meant a lot to him. He greeted everyone he passed in the streets, even any children who were playing, and was known to make time for anyone, including, or perhaps especially, the poor and the powerless. Once, a woman who suffered from mental illnesses called out to him across the street, telling him that she needed something from him. He replied softly to her, Mother, tell me on which side of the street you would prefer me to speak with you so that I can do what is best for you. He, ﷺ, then stood and listened to what troubled her. Similarly, when a Bedouin once urinated in the mosque, infuriating many Muslims, Muhammad ﷺ called out not to prevent or harm him. Instead, he asked for a jug of water and then went and washed where the man had urinated. Notice even Couple of things here. The Prophet Muhammad SAW softened his voice and was gentle with an old woman who was suffering from mental illnesses. He was gentle and kind with her and made time for her. Even though this woman may have had no benefit for him in his life, some people today, they're thinking along these lines: what benefit would I get from that relationship? What benefit would I get from talking to that person? It's not the way the Prophet Muhammad taught. The Prophet Muhammad was kind and gentle. And when a ignorant Bedouin once urinated in the mosque, Muhammad himself came with a jug of water and cleaned the area where the man urinated. According to one hadith, he spoke calmly to the Bedouin, who recalled, he, Muhammad got up and came to me, and may my father and mother be ransom for him. He neither rebuked nor reviled me. So he neither told him off or hated him, but only said, this mosque is not for urinating in. Rather, it is built for the remembrance of Allah and prayer. Muhammad clearly had affection for children and was often seen playing with them or carrying them on his shoulders. Once, when addressing his followers from the pulpit, he noticed two of his infant grandchildren, Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein, waddling in unsteadily. He walked down, scooped them up, and carried them back up onto the pulpit. He was especially fond of one granddaughter, Umama, and once during the solemnity of the communal prayers, of which he was the leader, enjoyed the fun of playing with her. The Messenger of Allah وسلم, led the people in prayer while she was on his shoulder. When he bowed, he put her down and took her up when he got up. He kept on doing so until he finished the prayer. Now, have you ever seen anybody do that today? This is the gentleness, kindness, understanding nature of the Prophet Muhammad SAW, that even when he was during prayer, when we are very disciplined and very focused on the prayer, he was actually holding his granddaughter. He even noticed, the Prophet Muhammad SAW even noticed that one toddler, a brother of Anas ibn Malik, nicknamed Abu Umair, loved a pet bird. Every time he saw the boy, Muhammad SAW inquired after the bird. These acts cemented in the minds of his followers their belief that Islam was for everyone, even the unimportant and the most debased, and that their Prophet ﷺ cared about them and really did have the common touch. Muhammad ﷺ liked courtesy and good manners, but hated artifice, formality, and hierarchy, or to be treated with fawning deference. He did not like people to bow to him, to kiss his feet, or flatter him. After he emigrated to Medina, he initially stayed in the house of Abu Ayyub, sleeping downstairs, while Abu Ayyub and his wife slept above him. They found it terribly disrespectful to be above the Prophet Muhammad and asked him to swap places. He politely refused, instead telling them that he preferred it downstairs because it was easier for guests. Despite his companions sometimes suggesting he should dress more regally, especially when delegations arrived, he ﷺ refused, preferring to wear the coarse clothing worn by ordinary people. When he received gifts that were ostentatious or even just unnecessary, he was quick to give them away, usually to companions, the Sahaba, or the poor. He was so ordinary in the way he dressed, and so humble in the way that he carried himself among his companions, that when a Bedouin named Dimam ibn Thalaba once came to Medina looking to ask for the famous prophet some questions, looking to ask the famous prophet some questions, he scanned the Muslims gathered in the mosque, but was unable to distinguish which one was Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Perhaps most significantly, his community could see that he never enriched himself at their expense, but instead worked hard to raise everyone's living standard and to erase poverty. This he did by careful and judicious dispersal of both sadaqah, alms given by the believers for onward distribution, and zakat. This was an obligatory charity tax collected by the paid representatives of the polity for Muhammad to distribute to the poor, needy, stranded travelers, and burdened debtors, as well as to use for the inducement of alliances and the manumission of slaves, and at a time when there was no standing army, the purchase of weapons and equipment for warfare, i.e., for the defense of the community. Muhammad never appropriated anything for himself or his family, and on one occasion even made his little grandson, Al-Hassan, spit out one of the dates that he had been given as charity. Don't you know that we can't eat anything given for the poor as charity? As a prophet and chieftain, he was formally entitled by Arabic custom to be a substantial source of income, 1/5 khums of all income generated by campaigning. This is less than the quarter that other Arab chiefs customarily took. The Quran is clear that this khums was not for Muhammad's enrichment, but was for him and his family to live on, and also and especially to devote as he saw best to fighting poverty and inequality. And know that whatever you take as gains of war, to Allah belongs 1/5 for the messenger and his kinsfolk, and for orphans, the poor and the wayfarers. Observe this if you truly believe in Allah and what we sent down on our servant on the day of judging, the day when the two forces met at Badr. Allah has power over everything. We know from the hadith and biographical sources, especially Ibn Hisham, Al-Waqidi, and Ibn Sa'd, that Muhammad was scrupulously impartial in the way he allocated the other 4/5 of any bounty generated by battle, giving participants and approved absentees equal shares regardless of status or perceptions of strength or weakness. I mean, this is remarkable, in a time when people would have been seen very differently because of the color of the, or because of where they came from, or whether they were Quraysh or another elite family, or whether they were poor people, or whether they were people who immigrated to that region, or whether they were people initially from there, which tribe they were from, all these different distinctions. And yet the Prophet Muhammad, he treated them all equally and fairly. I mean, this was revolutionary in the society of the times. And it really speaks of what Islam is really about. And it shows why Islam appealed to people's hearts, because the Prophet Muhammad always treated them fairly. As Prophet Muhammad once explained, I neither give to you nor withhold from you, but I am merely a distributor, and I allocate as I am obliged. We also know that he never took more than his entitlement, and that with the only exception being occasional one-off rewards to warriors for distinguished service or to induce loyalty from other tribes, which he paid from his own fifth of the khums. So when he did give someone an extra reward, and this was exceptional, not very often, but when the Prophet Muhammad did, he gave it from his own money. He didn't give it from the rest that was the other four-fifths that were allocated for the community. He gave it from his own share. It says a lot about, how he was. We also know that he never took more than his entitlement, and that with the only exception being occasional one-off rewards to warriors for distinguished service or to induce loyalty from other tribes, which he paid from his own fifth of the khums, he steadfastly used the khums for the purposes mentioned in the Quran. Sometimes from the khums, he actually chose not to take his entitlement, i.e., the one-fifth of the one-fifth. He often used his own money for the community rather than spending it on himself. We know, for example, that after the expulsion of the Banu Nadir tribe from Medina, which resulted in the seizure of many of their possessions as his sole right, the expulsion did not come through battle, so were not regular spoils. Muhammad spent the money on horses and weapons for the army. He and his family also lived simply, for instance, eating bread made from ground barley rather than refined wheat flour, and he devoted the rest to social programs. Shortly before he died, he had so little money left that he used his own iron armor as security for a loan to buy barley for his family. When he died, all he owned was that armor, his white mule, and a piece of land in Khyber that he had received as his khums, but which he did not pass on to his children because, he said, prophets should not die owning property. It was therefore given away as sadaqah. So when the Prophet Muhammad left this earthly life, that's all he had. Some armor, a white mule, and a piece of land in Khyber that he also gave away. I mean, when you think about that, how many people are following the Sunnah? That's my first thought. How many people are following the Sunnah? It's like we're so worldly today. Even the most humble people today are so worldly by comparison to the example of the Prophet Muhammad. Such a remarkable man. But he was also someone who had that common touch, that he could relate to everybody. He was fully part of that community. He cared for people. He showed how much he cared for older people, for people who had mental illnesses, for people who had other illnesses, for people who were weak and, they couldn't do everything that maybe they would have liked to have done, but he supported them. He took care of the people within his community. Even the boy who had a pet parrot or pet bird, he used to ask about it. How is the bird? You think about that. So much care and attention. That's true leadership. And while he was leading, he wore the simplest clothes. He didn't wear fine clothes. He was given many fine clothes, beautiful clothes, Byzantine clothes, Persian clothes. He might have worn them once or twice, but then he quickly gave them away to someone else. He didn't want worldly things. The Prophet Muhammad just wanted to please Allah and for his community to be successful. And that is truly beautiful example that he left for us, truly remarkable, and something which we should never forget. It's not talked about often enough, I think, just how the Prophet ﷺ was with people. And it's like, on the one hand, he seemed very ordinary, but on the other hand, was extraordinary in how he was like that, because no one's like that. Most people have an ego. Most people, they let that get to them at least a little bit. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ didn't. Well, he was so, he so transcended his ego. It was just really lovely with everybody. And I think this is something which we need to think about today, because if we call ourselves Muslims, we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we believe in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we say we're trying to follow the sunnah. Well, how about following this sunnah of being kind and gentle with everybody, being thoughtful, caring about everybody, genuinely from the heart, not just making a show of it, but when we say Salam alaikum, peace be with you, we really mean peace be with you. When we make dua for people, we really want them to be best and to be successful. We really want them to be healthy. We really genuinely care. This is how our Prophet Muhammad was. This is how the Sadiqeen, the pious generation were. Let's strive for that, and inshallah, even if we just get a little bit closer, then it would be better. And you think of how beautiful and wonderful the world would be if everybody was just that little bit more thoughtful. Anyway, thank you to my friend Joel Hayward. He sent me this lovely book earlier in the year. Oh, no, he sent me a couple of years ago, actually. I've had it longer than I thought. And it's a wonderful book. The Leadership of Muhammad, a historical reconstruction. He's trying to be as academic and straightforward in this account of the Prophet Muhammad's life. And I think it's a really valuable contribution. So may Allah bless Joel, and look forward to reading more of this book, and to, inshallah, future books from Joel Hayward. So thank you for joining us for today's Friday Reflections in the early hours of Saturday morning. Inshallah, next week I'll actually get it on Friday, but it's been a busy week and I don't like neglecting this. So thank you for joining us. I wish you all a wonderful weekend. If you're in the UK, good night and good morning. Wherever you are, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be with you.